The clock has struck 7. Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm tempted to say welcome, but this is your home. And
well, this isn't my home, but certainly Christchurch is my home.
Right. Yeah. Very dull, dark, damp night here tonight. So this is a first, and the Anglican community of St Mark wanted to have a conference, and COVID got in the way. So Plan B was to have some presentations, vidcasts that could be a contribution to the church and also a resource to draw on. So this is our Opus 1, and Opus 2 and 3 are in the pipeline. So we're really excited about this, and we have 1 hour, and we really want to make the most of it.
Sure.
So I'm going to begin in prayer, and it's going to be about COVID, which perhaps everyone can feel already has been a time of disruption and difficulty, and we wouldn't have chosen for it. And today the book of Joel came to mind, and I thought to pray out of that now. So let's just open in prayer. Lord, we were nurtured on the prophecy that Joel brought, that in the last days you would do a great work. You would send out your Spirit on your sons and your daughters, your old and your young. And it was all in the aftermath of a locust plague. And more than a locust plague, marauding armies and destruction. But the language of the locusts, the choppers and the biters and the cutters, and the loss that was suffered. And we pray, Lord, as we reflect and discuss this time, which feels a bit like a locust plague. Something has been taken. We've been robbed. We've been deprived. But we look for your word and the hope that there always is in what you're going to do next. And we pray that in the questions and the reflections and the telling tonight, that there is revelation, there is a clarity of illumination over our circumstances, and there comes a new hope for what to do and be now and going forward. And we ask this in Jesus' mighty name, knowing that you don't leave us alone on the journey, but you walk with us. Amen.
Amen.
Well, Richard, just a little bit about you. You're a counsellor with a capital C, and you have your own practice and practice/ministry here in Christchurch. You're definitely a Christian. You've been in church land deep a long time, as a leader, as a minister, and you've lived through the last year or two. You're speaking into the lives of many through this season, so we're delighted to be able to talk to you and hear your reflections on what's happened, where we are, and how to look at the way forward. So let's just start with a general question. This is about COVID, but what's happened?
It really depends on which angle you want to come to from that. But certainly when we look at what's happened in the church world and what we've seen happen to people involved in ministry, especially senior leaders, but all forms of ministry, there's a bit of carnage out there. Things have become very messy because our usual ways of being have been completely disrupted, and most people are simply wanting to get back to normal. So the uniqueness of the situation has added additional pressure points. That means many people are feeling a lot wearier, more tired, burnt out, drained as a result. Others are feeling a sense of despondency. Certain leaders that I spoke to reported to me, they said, this is not what I signed up for. And some who have only started ministry in the last few years, they said, I wanted to tell people how to follow Jesus, and now we've had to deal with COVID and lockdowns and vaccine mandates, and also help our people navigate the conversion therapy bill, and to be on the wrong side of everybody's opinion on whatever they came down with. So there's been so much that's gone on that's added additional emotional pressure compared to the usual pressure that we find in the wear and tear of ministry.
It's not just the pandemic, is it?
No, there's a lot more that's going on. Certainly the pandemic and the ripple effect of, or the side effects that have gone with it have provided a huge toll. There's certainly been a shift within our culture over the last, it's been ongoing probably since the 60s, but certainly it's sped up in the last 5 to 10 years. And of course, the Anglican Church has felt the brunt of that in certain areas as well. So there's a lot going on out there, and many leaders just want to get on and do ministry like we used to. And can't we just have things go back to normal is also another phrase that I'll hear, whereas in one regard, it's at least our current normal, if not our new normal. And because it hasn't settled, the thing that is quite disconcerting is it's a new normal that is still in a state of flux, which adds more pressure points and it just increases the emotional drain for many people.
Right. Now, I've waited just a few minutes before giving you some details. Our participants seem to have leveled at 43 connections. You know, multiply that by 45. It's flexing there. So please make use of the chat facility. If you have any questions, send them in. Off screen is one John here who is monitoring the questions and the comments as they come in, and we hope to refer to them later in the session. You get to interface or meet a lot of people. Can you talk about, really in human terms, what all that is doing to people? Can you give language to describe?
Well, I think it's language that's quite common that everyone would see, where we see an increase of despondency and frustration. There's an increase of weariness. For some, there's an increase of anxiety. But probably the most profound is that sense of despondency or disillusionment, that things are just not what we hoped they would be. We don't feel like we're winning. We feel like we get on the wrong side of everybody. And so really, is this what I'm called to?
Right. So there's a note of unpopularity, being unlovely in all this that you're bringing out. Can you just talk about that?
Yeah, so I think church leaders get hit on a few major fronts. One of them is around their sense of being acceptable, being liked, being included. And when that's an area of vulnerability, then when you have things like vaccine mandates where one church might have a decree that we're only going to do vaccine mandate services, and then those who are unvaccinated are screaming, this is unfair. There's energy that's being put into having services for the unvaccinated as well, where it's been really small, and then they've been told they're wasting resources. There is everyone has upskilled with online streaming and online services, and then there's a sense of people aren't necessarily happy because they want to be back together, and others saying, I don't really want to come back now because I'm still worried about COVID, or in fact it's really nice to have church in my jammies and with a cuppa. So there are those aspects. When it came to the conversion therapy bill, the church leaders I spoke to said it didn't matter if I came down saying we don't want the conversion therapy bill. We were told by those who did want it that we were being unloving. If we said actually we need to have more of an inclusive mindset, we were told by those who were more conservative that we weren't speaking up enough and we needed to be protesting against this. For those who said this is not an area we're going to speak into, then they were told that they were shying away from the important issues and being disobedient to God. So it felt like, from what I've seen, it certainly feels like church leaders have felt more in the firing line, as well as feeling like they're not winning a lot, as well as on the other side, which isn't so much around acceptability, but around a sense of succeeding. Right. That the plans that they had in where they thought they wanted the church to go and what they thought they wanted, how the church to grow, and strategies that they had made all have been put on hold until church services can return to normal, until such time as COVID has passed by. So whether it's been around issues of acceptability light, or it's around issues of significance, succeeding, achieving, trying to be about what they believe God is wanting them to be about, there's a lot of frustration that it's a lot harder, and this isn't necessarily what we thought ministry was going to be like.
So I would expect you'd get to talk to a lot of church leaders, because we're the sort of people who recognise that we need accountability and support and supervision and all those sorts of things. So we pop our heads up and speak of our frustrations and bewilderment. Can you talk a bit about what it's like, let's say, for the church in general, church members, people who identify as Christians?
Yeah, what this season has been like for them.
Yes.
I think it's been a highly disruptive one. For some, they've felt a greater sense of disconnection from God, because the rhythms of going to church on a Sunday at a usual time in a usual way helps them to connect with God. So the fact that that isn't happening in the way, or hasn't happened in the way they wanted. Right. Then there's another side which I see where there is because we live in such a consumer society, when people have realized, so watching it online is an option, then in fact maybe I'll do that. But their faith is one where they're probably suffering from the disconnection of other people, encouragement in their faith. So their Christianity has become more of a consumer event rather than a following of Jesus event.
Right. So if we drill down into that, discipleship has, as it were, been dusted down in the last few decades, at least in my hearing. It should never have been off the top priority, but it's sort of been rediscovered. What does that say to us if consumerism is actually operating? Let me put it this way: what might be the discipleship challenge in this season?
Yeah, I think there's a wonderful discipleship challenge in this season, because if you're seeing that discipleship has been rediscovered, then that's great. I'm not seeing necessarily that discipleship has been rediscovered. I'm seeing our lack of discipleship has been exposed.
Right.
What we've tended to do in the past is have a sense of, even if we theologically and intellectually disagreed with this, we've emotionally seemed to have settled to the sense that what's important, it's important for you to be a Christian, and now that you're a Christian, then what's really important now is that you come along to our Sunday service, and potentially you go to a small group, and we want to unscrew your head. We want to fill you up with some knowledge and some understanding about God, shake you up and down, and hopefully that will transform you and enable you to be a follower of Jesus.
Richard, have you been reading my mail?
Really?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, an experience for me, Barbara and I came back into the country maybe 20 months ago, and we came into a church which had lots of books, and they're all books that I would have drawn on in the 90s. And they're typically how to do this, programs, there's a confidence, there are things you can do. And I look at them now and I think, they're not tools for this season.
Sure, yeah.
And that's how I identify with that not just bewilderment, but the sense that, what made good sense in previous decades doesn't now. And it connects with that exposure of consumerism you're talking about. And we've talked discipleship, but actually we've got a lot to learn.
I totally agree.
So one of the things that in my discussions I've realized is that the national experience of all this is quite different. Do you get to network or to hear stories, the length of the country?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we connect with people as far as Whangarei all the way down to Invercargill. There's a lot there that's common in the mix. There are some variations in different denominations. Certainly things seem like they're a lot more intense in the Auckland area. Certainly when I've been speaking with church leaders who've experienced a heightened degree of weariness and despondency, there's been a lot who have come primarily from that Auckland area as well. But also when I see and I look across the country in terms of emotional response and emotional resilience, there seems to be a common thread across the country.
In terms of?
In terms of a lack of it, in terms of weariness, frustration. There are a number of church leaders who are thinking of either leaving their church or giving up ministry altogether. That's not a high proportion, but we're certainly encountering more of those now. There's certainly more leaders that I've noticed that are questioning their ability to lead and wondering maybe they got it wrong, maybe they're not a good leader, and so then they need to stop fooling themselves and go join someone else's church or go get a secular job or something like that. So I think there's a lot more pressure that's coming upon the leaders. Certainly that's what I'm seeing across the board.
That sounds like a lack of clarity or a loss of clarity in role.
In part, what I think there's a number of factors that are causing emotional drain, and church leaders haven't known how to recover from that. Some have said, I just need to push through like I've done in the past. Others have said, this is just for this season and I'll get through, and they've ended up giving more and more emotionally and ended up burning out or drying up as a result. In terms of role, what I would suggest is it's not so much a lack of clarity of role in the language that I use. It's a lack of clarity of calling and of true purpose that they were what they're supposed to be about in the first place. Because in that end, one of the things that I find is that one of the pitfalls of most church leaders is an over-identification with the role. And in that, one of the pitfalls is what they perceive to be key markers of success within a role. So if the markers of success are met, then I personally, as a human being, feel like I'm worthy, I'm significant or whatever, because the numbers are good on Sunday, or the numbers are good on the streaming, or the income levels remaining high, or whatever those factors are. And when those factors are met, now I feel worthwhile as a human being. And when they're not, and especially they're getting impacted or confused with what's happened with COVID and lockdowns, then they mistakenly believe that either they were called into the wrong place there, or they mistakenly believe that there's actually something wrong with them.
Right. Now, sitting here listening to you, that sounds like a very male issue. I'm tempted to ask, is there a gender differential here?
In part, there's certainly with the female leaders that I've worked with, there is still an issue of, am I succeeding? What they tend to have on top of what you might call as a normal male issue is they also have the issue of needing to prove themselves. They feel like this is a male-dominated industry, which it is, and therefore they need to be a better communicator, a better leader in order to taken seriously in order to be given a voice, something along those lines. So I wouldn't say it's purely a male thing. I think it is embedded more in the role. And in fact, I would say that many women have a double burden of trying to prove themselves in a male-dominated industry.
Right. When we spoke earlier today, at one point in the conversation, this fork in the road came, and I've met this myself. So it was either people struggling and thinking, if we push through the goals, the methods, the program that we've had, we'll get there. And others are sort of after the cataclysm in a place where, no, there is no new normal yet. We're left with remnants, with leftovers, with scraps even. Could you address those two groups or evaluate that situation?
Sure. Well, like with the first group that says we just need to push through, or what they'll say is we're on hold with our strategies, our vision, our plan, until such time as we can get back to normal. And that ties in with what I was speaking about before, where we have a very fixed sense on what is success in ministry. And what I find is that more often than not, church leaders will say to me, despite what my theology says, despite what I know intellectually, despite what I want to admit, what is success in ministry? And it's that the numbers are increasing, or that the income level is good, or something along those lines. And it's not what they theologically want to be the case, it's what they emotionally know to be the case. And we have churches that will model such things. And so one of the things that I found here in Canterbury when we had the earthquakes was that I noticed two different types of church leaders. There was the one where the earthquake happened, and when I checked in with them, they said, Richard, it's horrible. We started the year, we had a leadership retreat, we planned the year, we had our vision, we had our goals, we had all of that, and then the earthquakes happen. And so I guess that's all on hold. We're having to worship in a different building at a different time. And it wasn't exactly like this took God by surprise, but for them there was an agitation and a frustration that they couldn't achieve the goals that they wanted. And I totally get that. But there was another group of leader where I said, how are you going with this? And they said to me, oh wow, they said, this is great. They said, don't get me wrong, it's not that we want the earthquakes, but this has opened up so much for us. We've now got an opportunity to communicate with our neighbours, to scoop out their liquefaction, to bring food parcels, to get to know them. We can get in their life in a way that we just couldn't before. So one of the things that certainly pointed out to me was when we focus purely on our vision and our goals that are based on our unconscious emotional definitions of success, that's never going to lead us into a good place, although they will seem like they are godly, theologically acceptable things. Whereas when we come back and draw back to our core values, what is it that Jesus actually wants us to be about? What's important to him? What warms his heart that we could be about? Well, then in one sense, it doesn't really matter what the environment is like. We will always thrive. Because we'll be about the key things that he wants to be about in the unique confines of where we find ourselves. So for those who say that we've got to push through, I'd say that's fine to look at that and to do that. And if that's what you feel like God is calling you to do, I would simply ask them a couple of questions. At what cost is it going to be to push through? And if you're going to push through, the second question is, are you sure your ladder is up against the right fence? So that, is this really what God is wanting you to be about? For the despondent ones, one of the things that I would say is in the liminal area that we're a part of at the moment, in this flux that we're a part of, this is never a time for despondency. Because when we see a church that's under persecution, when we see a church that's imprisoned, when we see a church that seems like it's under the pump, God is never mocked. and he is always at work. So my question to you is, what's God calling you to do? Where's the next step to take? Because just because the environment looks difficult doesn't mean that our God has abandoned us.
Okay. So just looking at the camera for a minute, maybe you could just ask yourself the question, where are you consciously? Are you pushing through? This is a disruption. We'll get back to traction and slow progress, a bit like the economic cycle. Or are you in a place where I need to really reflect on my calling again and come to a fresh understanding of how I'm to be and do in this season? Our hope in this conversation is to speak words where somehow God is heard to bring hope. We're not going to bring hope, that's not our mandate. But if we look forward and we consider, let's drill down into this. What are some of the, as it were, the germs or the seeds of hope that you have encountered or recognized springing for people in this season? And as leaders, but also just Christians wanting to live as Christians in 2022, given all that's happening.
Yeah. I mean, there's a few things in that. The first one is, I think, leaders re-examining what they are actually able to do and capable of doing, and re-examining their the expectations they've placed on themselves or they believe that others have placed on them, so that they've adjusted their expectation. At times they've lowered their expectation to be able to take care of and to steward their own well-being. This body, this energy, these resources that God has given us to fulfill his purpose here on the planet. To be able to steward that and steward it well, I think is really important. And to see people taking that seriously, I think is really key. The second thing that is a small seed of hope are those who are willing to reconsider what ministry is actually all about. So whether we call it discipleship all about or ministry, and to recognize that sometimes we've been captivated by the what we do, that we've lost sight of the why we do it. And that's led us into a despondent place, a place where, we see someone like Paul, where he's called to be an apostle to the Gentiles. His heartbeat is to lay a foundation where no one else has laid one before. And yet, at one point in his life and in his ministry, he's imprisoned for good. I mean, I think it's about 5 years he's in prison, and he certainly doesn't come out of it. This doesn't have a happy ending. And yet when Paul is in his lockdown, he isn't despondent. His calling goes nowhere. He simply gives expression to it in a different context, where he tries to evangelize the leaders, the prison guards, and also he then encourages the church through writing. And we have the New Testament that we do because Paul got put into lockdown. And so I think that's a wonderful example of why there is always hope and God is always at work. So when I see leaders start to rethink, actually, what's truly important here, looking and re-examining why we do, what are we hoping to achieve with this, and then adjusting the what we do, I think that's quite hope-filled.
So what I'm hearing from you, again and again and again here is we need to shift.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of my heartbeat, has been, I think we've needed that for a while. We've known we've needed to, but to be fair, in another part, we just haven't known how to do it. And even though we've known that we've needed to shift, whether we like it or not, we are so invested in our current setup and structure that it is massively hard to start to change that. And like all good humans, we won't want to change unless it hurts enough. when we see the apostles gathering in the church, gathering in the beginning of Acts, they were quite happy staying put. It wasn't until a persecution hit that they became the church scattered and started to move into different parts of the world. So yes, we need to shift. It's not easy, and we don't want to.
One of the things that we typically, people want is community, family, connection.
Yep.
And yet that's been disturbed by the COVID experience. You mentioned the break of rhythm. Simply, meeting together regularly is a powerful thing. It's bonding, it builds a sense of shared history and association. And yet that's the very thing that's been ruffled and disturbed. And then at the moment, for example, you have COVID, you have the winter, you have just a number of disruptors just pile up. And I wouldn't say, in my experience, people are isolated or alienated, but definitely the bonds of connection and shared life are dropped, aren't they? Even the tension around communion.
Right.
We've had waves of SARS and before that HIV and now COVID. Could you just speak into that and maybe just think through or speak into just what might be the right shift towards a healthy association, but not based on what we've been used to or relied on.
And it's interesting that you said, I mean, part of our church community is based around community and belonging. And yet that's one of our great strengths, but that's also one of our great weaknesses. I remember one church leader once said that one thing that all dying churches have in common is great fellowship. One of the things that as humans we hunger for is belonging and community. Now, one of the difficulties, one of the problems with that is we want to settle. We want to stay put. Stanley Hauser talked about and used the analogy of Watership Down. And he said in this, one of the pressures that come across these rabbits is in many ways what comes across for us as a church. What do the rabbits want to do? They want to burrow down. They want to dig down deep. They want to be in a community, in a burrow. But with what happens, they have to go across fields. This isn't what rabbits do because it makes them exposed. They have to navigate water. This isn't what rabbits do. But what keeps them going is a greater story, a greater narrative, where they ask themselves when they get caught, what would the great mythical rabbit Alarachai do? And with that, they gain new strategy, new energy in order to move forward. So in one part, and please hear this in the right context, in one part, the disruption of our community or our belonging isn't necessarily a bad thing if it provokes us to give expression to other aspects of our faith that perhaps have been underexpressed. And I think that's where we need to draw upon our stories of the very real, not mythical at all, wonderful Jesus, and the way that he would call us to be at this time, so that we end up doing things that are very un-rabbit-like, very un-Christian-like, very un-Anglican-like, in order to navigate a new world that we didn't ask for, that we didn't want, but has come upon us.
Now, that is deliciously provocative. How about I give you first bite at this? What might be part of that sort of departure from what's been normal? For example, do everything decently and in good order. Might there be something that is less than decent and not in good order that is appropriate in this time?
That's a great question. I also feel like you're angling at something that you know the answer to. So why don't I reflect that back? What would you say in this, Francis?
Well, one of the best things I think I did this year, and it happened twice, I hugged people who weren't vaxxed.
Right.
And it was a profoundly satisfying moment of ministry. So here are all the warnings going, all the precautions that have been published, you know, and yet my pastor's heart said this person needs a hug. And I'm vaxxed, you know, and I didn't want to talk about the issue, but I didn't want to leave them alone. And yes, I thought that was counter a lot of things, and felt very right. So it's been an experience for me this year that I thought.
And so to jump on that and to add to that, I think what you're saying that I would also definitely agree with is, where are there opportunities for us to give expression of love to those we wouldn't usually love, that those who are not our own, that those who don't feel comfortable to us. I remember when I was leading a church, two of the most profound experiences of the Holy Spirit that I had. One was where a group of guys brought a whole bunch of pallets, wooden pallets, and chopped them up for a man who was an elderly guy who didn't have much, and we stocked up his fire supply. Another was when a family who came along to our Mainly Music weren't a part of our church, and they needed to get out of their state house, and because they were going somewhere else, and they needed to clean it up, and it was not great. And I remember being in this outside shed where they had, with their 4 children, they used disposable nappies. You're only allowed to put so much in the rubbish, and so they had piles, these big bags of used nappies in the shed, piling it up. And as we pulled that out, and of course they had tumbled out, and the nappies with all their sticky things had been stuck to the floor and the wall. And as I'm scooping that off with a spade and trying to put it in, there is just a sense of God's presence there. So I think when we allow community to expand beyond who feels comfortable for us, and include as an expression of love those that we don't want to or wouldn't normally love, I think that is wonderfully disruptive and very kingdom.
Thank you. I wonder if it's time to just refer to the questions. Just a few coming in there. John, is there anything beyond what we see on the screen in front of us?
Not yet, but I'm hoping that as you answer those, people will start sending in more.
Okay. So, we can see there, there's a question from Brian, and he's put it publicly out there. Rejoicing in the Lord always, being tested on that this year.
Yeah, the question is from there of where am I? I'm not sure if that means where is his heart. Is his heart one where he's rejoicing in the Lord always? Certainly to find that which we can give thanks for when things are not going the way that we want is hard. But finding things that we can be grateful for and give thanks to in a non-denying of what we're going through way, I think is quite replenishing for our heart and our soul.
Right. COVID seemed to uncork a lot more than just the pandemic, didn't it?
Yeah.
And I asked that because, rejoice in the Lord, the unhappiness factor. A number of times, I've listened to people, either on the media or in person, and thought, your unhappiness is far bigger than this pandemic and what it's doing to you. You comment on that, or where might we need to do work in that regard?
Yeah. I mean, that's a great question. It's also quite a big question. I certainly think that we've got a narrative that a world is soaked in a pandemic with what seems like a global recession, all of that is adding to a sense of doom and gloom that we're surrounded by, in the same sense of being surrounded by a grey, horrible, rainy day. It seems to be all pervasive, and it's certainly eating into people's happiness and their contentment. I also think that one of the things that we need to recognise is that we're in what I referred to in the change process as the disorientation phase. Change has, in the way I talk about it, 3 distinct phases: orientation, disorientation, reorientation. So whether this is change that we've chosen, like I'm choosing to give up smoking, or I'm choosing to move to another city, or it's change that's been forced upon us, whether it be a loved one has died, or we're in the middle of a pandemic, or we're in lockdown, or something like that. We start from what we are orientated to and what's very familiar. But when that change process then begins to happen, we move into what we call the disorientation phase, where we go, I don't quite know how to do life like this. I don't know how to be a non-smoker. I don't know how to live in this other city. I don't know how to do this. And that is hugely disruptive.
Yes.
One of the things that's contained, in the disorientation phase, is one of the scariest things to us on the planet.
And what's that?
The unknown. You see, our mind does not like to think that there is this unknown around us, which is why some of the scariest movies and TV programs are the ones where they never show you the movie or the beast or the creature, because your imagination can create something far worse than Hollywood could ever come up with. And so when we enter into a flux, into things being in an upheaval, where we haven't even landed in a new norm, the fact that change seems to be continual is our new norm. That is highly disruptive. And if we don't know what's going to happen, there's that sense of the unknown, and our mind wants to know that we can be safe. So it wants to know, have I got the resources? Is the future predictable? And at the moment, the answer is no. So our mind unconsciously will begin to freak out. There will be greater stress, pressure, tension inside of us as we struggle through this current scenario. And when people get into a disorientation phase, like you see someone giving up smoking or giving up drinking or whatever, they will at times go, this is horrible. Let me go back to what I'm orientated to.
Yes.
As the Bible says, dog returns to its vomit. But in that, one of the things that's really hard is in the now, when everyone says, can we just go back to the way things are? You can't. It's being withheld. And so that's additional energy that we're burning up as we resist and we fight of not wanting to be where we are. There is that kind of sense, how can we sing the Lord's song in this strange land? This is not Jerusalem. This is not what I signed up for. And as a result, I'm not sure I can sense God as much in this, but certainly I don't quite know what to do with it. So that disorientation phase can mess with us. I mean, the hope is, the good news is that you can come through it and be reorientated, have a new normal in the end. But that takes a willingness to actually process through the disorientation phase.
That brings us to, I think I've had 4 questions asking the same sum. You can see there, and some are coming directly to me. How do we then respond to that uncertainty and anxiety? There's another question that says, how do we minister to people who might be isolated and feeling undervalued? You've spoken about the good parts of disruption, but if you're still in the nasty part, if you're disoriented and stuck, how do you help people who are in that situation?
That's great. And so at one very basic level, you need to make sure that the person is taking care of the basics: sleeping, eating well, exercising, looking after themselves. If the basics aren't occurring, the only thing that will increase is their anxiety level and their weariness. The next thing is you need to find anchor points that provide a sense of security, understanding, certainty in the now. The anchor points might be the family, the friends that you actually still have around you. The anchor point might be the job that still keeps going. The anchor point might be your faith and your rhythm of reading scripture and your belief in God. The anchor point might be the sense of purpose that God has placed in your heart that you are to be about. The anchor point might be that you're still in the same city that you've been in for many years. When we get caught in the anxiety level of disorientation, what our mind focuses on is everything we don't know, and our mind will take us as part of an anxious response to the worst case scenario. Consciously or unconsciously, it will paint the worst case scenario, which for anybody, if you dwell in the thinking about the worst case scenario, your brain experiences it as if it has happened. So you just end up traumatizing yourself even more. So coming back to the what is, rather than being caught in the what if, what currently is, what do I have, what remains certain, who do I have in this? And to readjust your focus, because when there is a perceived threat, our mind will get so fixated on that. And we need to balance it by helping it to see the good, which is why rejoice in the Lord always, which is why, whatever is true, good, noble, all those things, to focus on these things so that it's not to be in a state of denial of what's going on, it's to balance and redress this flux. So I would say, find your new anchor points in it, be they your faith in God, your daily rhythms, your people in your life, your dog, your city. What is still good? And I'll get people to write that out. What is actually still good in your life?
Yeah, so true. Yeah, number one spiritual exercise is where you put your attention, isn't it?
We have a specifically Christchurch follow-up, which has come through to me here. What happens if there is lots of bad and unstable? So the example here is, I lost my house in the earthquake, my family's had to move away, my husband lost his job, my house, I had to move, I don't have my park, I don't have my local community, it was literally shut, and now you're telling me I have to change my church too. I'm
not telling you have to change your church. No.
But the point is, when there are 5, 6, 7 bad and flux things.
Sure.
Okay, you can hug the dog and hold on to your faith, perhaps. Sure. But what happens when it doesn't balance?
So part of that is a person is in a deep grieving process. So one of the things we need to do we need to again make sure the person is looking after the basics to the degree that they can. We need to revise the expectation of what you're actually going to be able to achieve in this time. But the other thing in this would be that we need to recognize that you're in a deep state of grief on multiple fronts, that this is unfair and this is unusual. And so what I would suggest is you've got to reach out as much as you can to get some support anywhere, however you can. So who are the people around you where you can offer some support, that can offer you some support, because you're going to need it. This is a time for grieving. This is not a time for changing church.
How do we support the youth and young adults through this time? Does it change depending on age?
That's a great question.
What's your experience there?
You can throw in elderly people too if you want.
Yeah, no, the interesting thing is with the youth, I mean, youth has gone through their continual expression of anxiety, depression, and mental health issues, and that's been more and more reported, and so that's been on the increase for a while. On another side, the youth are also showing a greater degree of adaptability to a changing world. They seem to be more adept at that. It would be probably those who are getting older that would find the change harder to be able to address and be finding some of the impacts of COVID and the isolation that came with lockdown and with COVID to be quite distressing.
What does discipleship look like in this season? How do we move away from just filling our heads with knowledge?
Yeah, that's a great one. And partly I would say that we're in a time of needing to reimagine and explore it again. So I'm happy to give throw some ideas into the brainstorming pool. I certainly don't think that I've got all the answers in that regard. But one of the things that it's coming back to the basics, the basic spiritual disciplines. Partly it's getting people to consider, rather than what is it that I need to do out of duty, or what do I do as my daily rhythm, what are the things that you do that increases your sense of closeness with the Lord?
Right.
And what are the spiritual practices that increase that? Then the next one is to be able to consider, what do I hear the Spirit saying to me that would help to give a small expression of His kingdom today in some places? So I think the spiritual disciplines are key, but ones that are there for a purpose, not just because this is what we know to do. And the other part is renewing a sense of love or focus as a community for those who are around us and how we can support them. So I think the outward focus is also really key.
A word which hasn't been said, but I feel you've been talking around it at points, is idolatry.
All right.
And, you're probably aware, but Jewish evangelism was basically calling people away from idols to true God. And I got the sense the way you were talking before that this COVID crisis, this experience has laid bare, especially for leaders, but others as well, some false things, idols that stand in the place of God.
Yeah.
Does that spark something?
Oh, yeah. Although, to be fair, I think as humans, we have a tendency to move towards idols all the time.
Absolutely.
And we have a tendency to move towards our false comforters. In Jeremiah 2:13, where the Lord says, this is what I've got against you.
Yes.
You deny the spirit that I want to give you, these living waters, and you've dug your own cisterns and they don't even hold water.
Correct.
That sense of moving towards the counterfeit, I certainly think that's there. I would want us to engage with a conversation around our idols, not in one that is judgmental or shame-filled, but more in one of an exploration of where have I placed my energies and what have I gone after, for what end and for what purpose. Because I think idols are always there as a counterfeit representation, or as a counterfeit meeting of a deep need that only God is to meet. So certainly we can talk about idols of consumerism, idols of individualism, idols such like that continue on. We've got a society that amplifies and the importance of the individual's right to choose and to have freedom over and above everything else. So if I feel like I want to do it, then can't I just do it? So I think part of that, we need to have a conversation in order to look at what we do need to change as a church. I think we need to have a conversation as to what idols, and again, not putting that in a judgmental sense, what idols are quite profound in our society that have also captivated our hearts.
Yes. And it begins in the church, doesn't it? This reflection, this sober consideration that might we have relied on something else.
On that subject, we have a question that's come through here. You've talked about geographical variation a bit, and you mentioned denominational variation. How would you diagnose the Anglican Church? Have you got words specifically for us?
Oh, where angels fear to tread. How would I diagnose the Anglican Church? I wouldn't want to be. I would feel that would be quite arrogant of me to step into an area to say that I could diagnose the Anglican Church.
Have you words of encouragement for us?
Anglican.
I've softened it a bit.
Oh, well, that's kind of you.
Or a suggestion of where we might, reflect.
Yeah, the Anglican tradition, from what I've seen, has a wonderful heritage in contemplative spiritual engagement and reflection. And I think that is one of the strengths that the Anglicans have that I'd encourage you to continue to pursue. The other things that I've seen in the Anglican Church is the Anglicans have tried to accommodate as many people as possible at times. And of course, there's a very big downside to that, but the other side is that there is an opportunity to see the needs of many people and to try to respond. So the strong contemplative side to the Anglicans, I think, is a strength. I also think the Anglicans' ability to not make everyone try to fit into one box, but to accommodate the needs and the spiritual needs of other people and the needs of those within our community. I would use that strength not so much on diversity of church services, but more in creativity in community outreach.
You're very encouraging, Richard.
Oh.
Thank you. John, are there any more questions?
I cannot see any more. If there are any final ones, please send them through to me quickly.
Right. So while people are maybe framing their questions, just this is being recorded, and the recording will be posted on the Anglican Community of St Mark's website, ACM, which has a very strong single URL. So it's ACM, it is acm.net.nz. Yes, that's simple, acm.net.nz. And if you have some feedback or you want to engage anything here, you can write to admin@acm.net.nz and it will get our attention.
Dale has contributed a lucky almost last. What are the signs children are not coping with the changes COVID has brought? What can we do to help them?
One thing I find with children is they're usually wonderfully obvious. And so one of the things that I would encourage parents to do is to know what your child's baseline is, to know the kind of behaviour that you would usually see from them, and look for variations in that baseline. So the child is more disruptive than they usually are, the child is more grumpy, more moody, the child is more withdrawn, the child is more tearful than they usually are. I think when you notice behavioural shifts that are different from their baseline, it would be an expression of something is emotionally disruptive for them. And that's where it would be time to depending on their age, but to draw them aside, to sit with them, to listen to them, to explore with them, to hear them from an empathetic point of view, to discover what might be going on for them.
Is there going to be a new normal?
There's always a new normal. It just may be changing. Whether we see this current pattern of mask wearing and hand sanitizing sort of standard of being, whether that becomes our new normal, or whether this shifts, there's no more masks, we operate in crowds like we usually do, the economy picks up and we're back. I think there's always going to be a new normal. The ability or the key is to be able to help ourselves through this. Because one of the things that I've sort of touched on that I also want to make mention of is with the pressures that people have been going through, with the pressure that church leaders have been going through, this has taken additional emotional energy than we usually have on any given day. The way our body works is, depending on our age, fitness stage, we have a certain amount of emotional energy that we expend through a day, we hopefully replenish overnight in food and exercise and all of that kind of thing. But when you have additional extraordinary pressures, then what happens is your body has a system by which it can use additional emotional energy, and it's called your adrenal gland. And what it really is, it's like the credit card system of the body. It allows you to use tomorrow's energy today. In the same way, if you want to buy something, you can use tomorrow's money today. What many people don't realize, though, that when they are using up energy, when they're trying to push through, and they think, I'll just be able to recover from this. We're going to have a weekend, I'll have a good sleep, and then I'll get on and do the 10 things that I usually would do. And then they find they can only do one thing. And they wonder, what's wrong with me? And in one regard, nothing's wrong. But just like when the credit card bill comes in, there's an emotional bill that comes in. And you need to listen to your body in order to pay back that emotional debt. If you don't, and you just knuckle through, that's when you're more likely to go to a kind of emotional bankruptcy and burn out, dry up, want to give up. So I encourage people, it's important in this season where so much has been going on, there's been so many pressures, to reduce the emotional expenditure. Where possible, revise your expectation for yourself and for your teams, and also increase your emotional income. The things that genuinely top you up and replenish you. I think we need to pay attention to that fact in stewarding our resources and making sure we are caring for ourselves in extraordinary circumstances. Because what I find is that church leaders and those in ministry have a double whammy. You're trying to deal with a changed society, changed system, and you're trying to care for people in your congregation. So that's a double whammy. That's going to drain your emotional resources. So making sure that you're monitoring your energy levels, that you're putting boundaries where you can, where you're potentially requesting additional time off, when you're just being gentle on yourself so that you remain a good steward, I think is also incredibly important. Before we go to look at reimagining who we need to be as a church, reimagining what we need to do, because that's going to take additional emotional energy to do that. So we first of all got to have the replenishment and have some of the repair before we can take that step.
Have we got time for one last question?
We do.
Is the rural, it's about rural church and rural church congregations, are they able to sustain in the long term in faith, hope and love? Do members need to play a part in their communities?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I would love to be able to contribute something of value to that, but my experience, I don't have that much experience in working with rural churches and rural Christian communities. So is there hope for them? I think was part of the question, in being able to continue in sort of faith, hope and love.
I think it was about, as far as I can understand the question, it's about sustainability in the longer term.
Yeah, and again, it depends on what we're trying to sustain. Sometimes when we've got fewer people and fewer resources, we're trying to do standard church or big church with fewer resources, and that is not sustainable. Being a faith community is sustainable, I would suggest, anywhere. It's more about how we do it and what our expectations are of what a church community is supposed to look like that can cause it to become unsustainable.
Richard, it's been a pleasure. I just have two last things to run past you. First is an anecdote that I think captures a lot of our desire to stay with the familiar, with a rhythm, even when it's really difficult, and that is singing with a face mask. And singing is so much part of church. And, the early data came out that when you sing, you aerosol far more. And there were some churches overseas that, became super spreader events, and in New Zealand too. But we keep singing. We keep singing. And I find it very difficult with a face mask on. And it doesn't sound very convincing. But it speaks to me of this, this is who we are, this is what we do. And even though it's difficult, until we find something else that allows us to express and sound together or resonate together, we keep trying. The other thing is, we haven't used the word conspiracy tonight, but all those things you've described get connected for some people, and the anxiety just magnifies. The petrol hits the fire. It's been a powerful experience, hasn't it? I mean, New Zealanders are so connected. We either have conspiracies ourselves, or we know people who are really anxious and worried about a worldview and patterns of development that they see. Pastoring amidst conspiracy theories.
This is just your small question, just to finish with.
And this really draws on everything you've said. It just pulls it together into a nasty knot at the end.
Part of what I would say is our focus needs to be not fixated on what the enemy is doing, but fixated on what our God is calling us to. What we see when there was a conspiracy with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, where it was, you need to bow down to this idol. And they said, look, in the end, we will not bow down because our God will deliver us. But I love the next part of it. Right. But even if he doesn't, we're not going to bow down to you, and we're not going to bow down to fear. And that's what I see a lot of that being about, is they bowing down to fear in this process. And one of the difficulties is the conspiracy theory, whether they are accurate or not, draw us into being fixated on what the enemy is doing and fixated on fear rather than fixated on faith and what our God is calling us to, and following him in that process. So I would bring it back, if as Jesus walks with us, would he be encouraging us to join the dots and to be fixated on what's going on in that conspiracy realm, or would he be calling us to be fixated on the one in front of us, on the needs before us, on the unclean spirit that needs to be cast out, that's binding a person in the now? So bring your focus back to actually what is constructive and faith-filling, so that the enemy doesn't just rob this world, but also rob your heart.
So dealing with and responding with what you can see and can take hold of.
That's right.
Rather than, as it were, what's over the horizon.
Yeah, and so in this, if we do scenario plays, if the conspiracy theory is right and it's all going to turn to custard, what do you hear God calling you to do in the midst of that? If the conspiracy theory turns to nothing, what do you hear God calling you to do in the midst of that? We have seen things that have come upon the people of faith where they have been abused and persecuted, and God still thrives in that situation. And we've seen other times where, as it says in the Psalms, that the traps that others have laid for us, they have fallen into themselves. So I would keep bringing my focus back on the one who is standing in the middle of the sea, not on the winds and the waves that are coming against us.
That was coming, wasn't it? So it's, as one person has reflected already in the questions, rejoice in the Lord always.
Absolutely.
Always. Richard, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
And just a reminder, if you have any follow-up on this, or you would like to direct questions to Richard, This is Richard's field. He's shared this with us tonight, but please, admin@acm.net.nz, just send us a line and watch the ACM website, acm.net.nz. These recordings will appear shortly. The next conversation is scheduled for August 31st, with Lyndon Drake. And again, it's in our theme of wanting to bring hope, especially in response to both challenges but also opportunities. Lyndon Drake and the Maori Church, Maori Christianity, our Maori brothers and sisters. That's the broad area we'll be looking at that night. Thank you very much for joining us. It's been a big encouragement. John, we've dealt with all the questions?
Yes, I think so.
Thank you very much. Well, I wish you a good evening and a restful night. God bless you all.